kick us off? Well, so first of all, just thanks to everyone for joining us for the first edition of Back to Basics. For those that are familiar with the Back to Basics from Nick's site last year, this is a program, or last year we presented through the TEC, the Transportation Engineering Council, presented some back to basics on those traffic engineering principles. This year we're mixing it up a bit, and the TPC, the Planning Council, is going to present back to basics, while the TEC presents on some forward to the future topics. So the way this is planning to run is this month will be back to basics, next year will be forward to the future, and we will alternate monthly throughout 2021, bringing you basics and future topics throughout the year. So my name is Lauren Trebert. I am the TPC chair for Nick's site, and just really excited to be able to bring you some of these planning principle webinars throughout the year. And today we're going to get started with Jason Schronce from NCDOT, who is the spot manager. And he is going to present to us on an overview of the NCDOT spot process. So with that, just a little background on Jason. The spot office that he manages, guides, and oversees the process of applying the Strategic Transportation Investments Law. This STI law is the framework for prioritization and programming of future transportation projects in North Carolina, which then leads to the development of the 10-year STIP. Jason graduated from NC State with a degree in civil engineering, and he is a licensed PE with a diverse resume, including railroad design, traffic safety, and forensic investigations. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jason. Following his presentation, I'll jump back in at the end to help moderate some questions. If you do have questions, please drop them in the chat function of GoToWebinar as opposed to the questions function. From what I remember, questions is only going to come to me, and chat will be, if you put in the chat pod, it should be displayed to everyone here in the webinar. So, and then following the questions, we'll wrap up with just some announcements. And yeah, so let's get started. Jason, I will give it to you.
All right, Lauren. Well, I appreciate the time and opportunity today. And technology is always fun. You'd think we would all have mastered the different systems by now, but they all throw us a little curveball. So thank you everyone for joining us this afternoon, and look forward to speaking with you. Again, Jason Schronce, manager of the prioritization office with NCDOT, that's underneath the division of planning and programming. So I'm going to go through just kind of an overview today of the spot process and how we score projects here in North Carolina, and end up developing our STIP from that. We'll cover a little bit of the spot process, and also kind of how the STIP gets programmed and where our budget comes from. So starting out, this is kind of the way I see NCDOT, and maybe I'm biased, and this is my view only and how it relates to our process. But I see the DOT kind of as an hourglass, whereas a lot of citizens, you know, we as citizens of the state and transportation officials, we observe needs and things that need improvement along our, you know, structures and our network, you know, just by living our lives and being citizens of the state. And from a long-range planning perspective, those needs are kind of categorized in groups, often into documents. The TPD, Transportation Planning Division, develops CTPs, and I know a lot of our NPOs create MTPs that kind of categorize and group these observations and needs. The next step of this process is the coordination between our metropolitan planning organizations, our rural planning organizations, and our division staff, and kind of determine what projects need to work their way down that filter into the spot process and into prioritization that ultimately leads to the development of the STIP. So I kind of see our role here as the filter in the whole funding hourglass of NCDOT, and how it, what the kind of point you have to go through in order to develop a project. So once a project gets into the STIP, gets through prioritization, obviously it goes to design, the NEPA process, then the letting process of picking a contractor, and then going through construction. And then once that project is completed, there's the ongoing and maintenance of that new infrastructure or improved infrastructure on our network. So this is kind of the way I see DOT and where we fall into that process. So back in 2013, the STI law was passed, and basically it guided us to identify priorities. So we needed a data-driven process in order to develop priorities that ultimately get divided into 3 buckets of spending, or 3 buckets of funding. You've got the statewide mobility bucket, the regional impact bucket, and then the division needs bucket, and that ultimately leads to the creation of the STIP. So the P5 process created the prioritization 5, created the 2020 to 2029 STIP, and that's the one that the department is currently working on, and is approved by our Board of Transportation. So just some terminology as we go through today. Prioritization is just the process of assigning data and scores to projects that get submitted for prioritization, or to the spot office. The STIP is the State Transportation Improvement Program, and it's a 10-year document of project funding and schedules. And so in order for the department to work on a project, it must be in the STIP. And the STIP is a federal required document that guides DOT on what to work on, and it also allows our federal partners to see that we're maintaining our infrastructure and our network across the state. There is the term programming, and I know, we here in the Raleigh area, we live in a very computer-centric location, and programming has many terms and many frameworks. But to us, programming is the process of assigning funding and schedules to projects. So it's the process of developing a program. So we're programming our program. And so that's just what that term means as we go about today. So the SPOT office stands for the Strategic Prioritization Office of Transportation. Prior to the STI law being passed and the SPOT office being created, there was this previous perception out there that decisions on what projects to make were made kind of in a back room, a bunch of people sitting around a table smoking cigars, and there really wasn't much transparency to how that process was done. It used to be that if you wanted to get a major project funded, you would contact your board member, and they would kind of bargain or make the case for that project in kind of this backroom setting, or at least this was the perception. And there wasn't transparency in the process, and that we felt like there was a kind of a rise up of a need for transportation reform, and the public wanted politics removed from the decision-making process. We used to have a picture here of a riot, but that's not nearly as funny as it used to be, knowing the political realm we're in. So we like to say that people wanted politics removed from the decision-making process, and what that end up being with the STI law and moving towards a data-driven process is it didn't remove politics. I don't like to say that we removed politics, but we did move politics. So the political guidance of transportation used to be very Raleigh-based, very central here in our state. Now the politics have moved. So with STI, the political influence of transportation decision-making is really now at the local level. Like the county commissioners that sit on the MPO and RPO TAC boards and TCC boards, they're the ones that really are guiding transportation decisions in North Carolina, because they are guiding the submittals that go into our prioritization process. Once it gets into the SPOT procedure, it's very data-driven, and so that those decisions at the local level actually have more power now than even the decisions in Raleigh and at the central level. So it took about 2 years to get the spot or the STI law passed and formulated, if you will. From 2011, that was when Executive Order 2 was signed by Bev Perdue. And she was the one that kind of got this kicked off. We like to say that it was very high on her priority list because it was her second executive order. I don't know what could have been more important than transportation reform, but obviously it was high. And then in 2013, STI, the law was formally passed, and we started operating that under that law within the department. And it literally changed how we select transportation projects. It said we must have a systematic and data-driven process. It must be a combination of quantitative and qualitative input, be multimodal. A lot of good aspects came from that law. So STI stands for Strategic Transportation Investments. You'll often hear us refer to the different cycles and rounds as, P1, P2, P3, P4, P5, P6. We are currently in P6, Prioritization 6. P1 and P2 were actually done prior to the STI law passing. So they were done in tandem to funding projects with the old equity formula. It was kind of a test run to see if we could get to a point to where this data-driven process could become the main mode of operi for the department, and we were successful. Some of those early groups and work groups and staff that came and worked on that really laid the framework for how we operate today. And so with that kind of dual effort going and proving that we could do this, we were able to successfully get the STI law passed, and P3 became the first time that the prioritization results were used to develop the STIP. So even though we're in prioritization 6, P6, we're in our fourth round of actually using the results. P1 and P2 were preliminary and test results. So just a little bit of background. NCDOT funds 6 modes of transportation. We have highway, aviation, biped, ferry, rail, and transit, public transportation. So those are the 6 modes that we fund. DOT as a whole has about a $5 billion annual budget, and half of that goes to funding projects through STI. So we have a very large budget of about $2.5 billion a year. That translates to where we go with that is the STIP is a 10-year document, and it has about $25 billion worth of projects in it. So if you break that down, it's 2.5 a year. We do work statewide. We have a lot of partners in this process. So the whole state is divided into 14 transportation divisions, NCDOT divisions, and also every square inch of the state is covered either by a metropolitan planning organization, MPO, or a rural planning organization, RPO. So each project has at least 2 partners, a NCDOT division and a PO that has input into that process. The STI law also says that these what is it, 54, did I get that right? 19 plus 18 plus 14. These individuals are the only organizations that can submit projects to prioritization. So an MPO, an RPO, and an NCDOT division engineer are the only entities that can submit projects in our process. The spot office doesn't have slots. The modal, divisions don't have slots. These are the only people that can provide projects to us. The reason why we needed to change how we did things is basically we're a growing state, right? We're projected to be the 8th most populous state by 2035. I think the projection here is that we'll be at 12.5 million people by then. We're already over 10 million people today. I think we'll actually hit this number closer to 2030 than necessarily 2035. Well, I don't have this slide here, but we have another slide that says when STI was passed, we had about 8 million people in the state, and we were projected to go to 12.5. That's equivalent to adding the entire population of the state of Kentucky into North Carolina. So it's a big jump, and it's good that we're a growing state. It's great for our economy and a lot of other things. What we find, though, is that about 85 to 90% of that growth is occurring in our urbanized areas. So North Carolina as a whole is still a very rural state, and we actually have counties that are decreasing in population, but a lot of that growth is coming in, to our urban areas and creating urban sprawl and even more congestion in places that are already experiencing congestion. So the STI law prioritizes capital expenditures. So these are like your mobility projects, anything that's adding capacity to the roadway. So expansion, widening, new location, and also modernization projects. So modernization projects to us are things that bring the roadway up to current standards. So it's taken a rural two-lane roadway that was built, say, in the 1950s to those design standards and improving it to today's standard, as it would be built today. So making sure the shoulder widths are correct and the lane widths, and that we have proper grade to our ditches and sight distance and all that type of stuff. It is needs-based, it is data-driven, very quantitatively derived. We're the only state that directly ties funding to our prioritization results. This is huge. There are other states out there that do prioritization. I don't think, we often say we were the first, but Virginia often gets tagged as the first. They had a better marketing department. We developed these processes about the same time. But Virginia has a clause in their law that basically says the governor can override the results, or at least can change a couple projects at their discretion. And we don't have anything like that. So we have to follow the results of prioritization when we program projects. The governor, the secretary, nobody can override those results. So it's very impressive in that sense. The funding for STI and the STIP comes from the Highway Trust Fund and federal aid. We do use a work group. So a work group meets before every prioritization cycle and makes recommendations to the Board of Transportation on the methodology of how we score, weights and criteria, and then the board approves that criteria. So the work group is made up of MPOs and RPO representatives, 4 NCDOT division engineers, and local advocacy groups. This is like the North Carolina Rules Center, Metro Mayors Coalition, League of Municipalities. I'm probably forgetting a few, but we have, I think, 28 voting members on the work group, and NCDOT can only have half of those. So it's meant to be a real collaborative effort with our external partners in developing this process. We do make all decisions in the work group on consensus, meaning that we don't take votes. Consensus to us means that we can have debates and we can struggle inside that meeting room when making decisions on how this works, but when every partner leaves that room, they must have, to some level, agree with the decision that was made, and that they can go out and advocate for that decision and back it up outside that room. So consensus has worked out really well for us, and it gives a lot of people buy-in to the process, and we like operating that way. There is a process of the law called bonus allocation, and this is for highway projects only, where if the locals, like a local municipality, a city of Raleigh or whoever, wants to bring money to a project, so non-state or non-federal funds, we will turn around and give half of their contribution back to them in another project of their choosing. So it incentivizes people to bring additional funding to their projects in order to help the score and keep them on schedule, and it kind of indicates a priority to us if they're willing to spend their own money towards their project. If you ever want to look up the general statutes, there they are, and feel free to go read those. They're actually not a bad read. So this is the core slide on how STI works. 40% of the funds go to that statewide mobility category, and the idea here is to focus on the significant congestion and bottlenecks across the state. Projects here are selected 100% on quantitative data, so whatever the score the spot office comes up with, that's the score for the project. The second category has 30% of the funds, and that's regional impact. Here, projects are selected 70% based on data and 30% on that local input points that can be applied to projects. A region is determined is two NCDOT divisions. So there's 14 NCDOT divisions, and there's 7 regions. Funding for each region is based on the population within that region of the whole state. The last 30% of funds is what we call division needs, and this is really meant to address that local needs. And here the score is 50-50, so it's 50% based on quantitative data and 50% local input points. And the funding for those 14 divisions is split equally among the 14. There is an aspect of the law called cascading that allows a statewide project that doesn't get funded at the statewide level to cascade down to regional impact, and then regional impact down to division needs. So a statewide mobility project actually receives 3 scores. It receives a score at statewide, regional, and division. Regional impact would only receive 2 scores because of the cascading effect. The STI law is also very directive about where projects qualify, and it's based on the route or the service that that project is receiving. So your statewide mobility projects are those on your interstate routes, your national highway systems prior to MAP 21, StrawNet, which is your military routes, and then anything that's a toll facility. At the statewide level, we also fund aviation projects and rail projects. Aviation projects are at your largest 5 commercial service airports. This is like Raleigh, Charlotte, Greensboro, just blanked on the other 2. I think it's Wilmington and Asheville, but I could be wrong on that. And then any on rail, it's anything on a class 1 railroad. So CSX, Norfolk Southern, and the North Carolina Railroad, NCRR. At regional impact, it's any other signed route. So a US or an NC route that didn't qualify for statewide. We pick up our other commercial service airports, and then it's really regional connectivity. So for transit, ferry, and rail, it's does it cross 2 or more counties? Can we say that it has regional impact? And it's also any expansion projects for ferry. Division needs is everything else. So all your county secondary road system routes and any federally aid eligible local roads also qualify here. Probably the big one you need to know here is that all bike-ped projects must be funded at the division needs level, and they cannot have state funding. So it must be federal dollars that are spent on independent bike-ped projects. The law is also very specific about the naming of criteria at the highway level. You see here that there's 9 criteria in each mode. There's 10 criteria overall. So the only one that's different at statewide, you see there's an economic competitiveness, and that's replaced with accessibility and connectivity at regional impact and division needs. So the work group is responsible for defining the formula and how the data that goes into the measures that go into developing these criteria. So the law itself only states the name. It doesn't state how we have to score these. So if you think about it like this, each project is required to have a score, and that's required by STI law. The criteria for highway projects, the names are predefined by the law, but the weights are determined by the work group. So for non-highway projects, the law just says that we have to have 4 criteria, and it doesn't give any more guidance than that. So the work group takes their time and develops measures, which are basically the formulas to generate criteria scores. And then we also search out data that are used to develop the measures. So the data builds the measures build the criteria, and the criteria build the score. If any one of you have ever seen our huge scoring spreadsheet that we release at the end of each cycle, there's a lot of logic built into that spreadsheet. And the logic is this, is that it follows these same sections. So you have your project information all the way to the left, and then the scores, and then criteria, then measures, then data. So working left to right, it follows the same structure of score, criteria, measures, data. We try to be consistent in how we show that. Another way to show this is our pie graphs. I love pie, so this is kind of where this came from. So the project score is 100%. Now, just because we define a criteria doesn't mean we have to give that criteria weight. So on a statewide corridor project, for example, the work group only gives weight to 5 of the 9 criteria. And so congestion, BC, safety, freight, and economic competitiveness, and you see how the pie is split up there. However, the measures break down those criteria one step further. So the congestion criteria is made up of 2 different measures. And so like existing volume and existing volume to capacity ratio. The law is pretty specific in the fact that we do not allow bonus points. However, there are a couple factors that get added into the process just to keep the proper projects moving forward. The 2 factors that we like to talk about are the two main factors are your future interstate completion factor, which is part of freight, and this is really to keep these future interstate corridors moving forward, because we're under a timetable with the feds, AASHTO, FHWA, or USDOT to get those projects completed, and so we want to make sure that they keep rising to the top and are in the STIP. The other piece is a part of our benefit costs criteria, and that's our funding leverage. And this is if a city or municipality brings additional funds to a project, we want to make sure that that project is given a little bit extra credit, if you will, because of that money that they're bringing to the table. We want to reward them for that contribution. So these are the 10 criteria total and how the work group defines the measures that go into the criteria. What I really wanted to show here, though, is that we try to find a nice balance between the existing conditions of the roadway and future benefits. I think long-term, it's the desire of legislatures that kind of to have scoring be based 50-50, 50% on existing roadway conditions, what's out there today, and 50% on what the project can be. I would say currently we're about 60-40, 60 existing, 40 future, but we're definitely working in that direction. When a project is put into, when a highway project, and actually every mode, are put into our spot online, which is our entry system, you have to choose a specific improvement type. And this is kind of the project types. We've generalized everything down to these 26 specific improvement types. And this really just helps our submitters know, gives them guidance on what data we need for each project. And so the difference here is that within each SIT, travel time savings is calculated, may be calculated differently. And each of these specific improvement types has a different safety benefit. And so this is just a kind of a snapshot of the different project types and how they move through our system. So for highway projects, we break the highway projects into 2 different categories, mobility projects and modernization projects. And we assign different weights to those projects. So for mobility projects, you see things like congestion, safety, benefit cost, freight. These are kind of the big ones, and they have a lot of percentage that goes into developing the scores. Here's where the STI law of 100, 70, and 50 for statewide, regional, and division. This is how the weights add up to that percentage of the score, and then you see the local input points that finish out the score there as well. So again, modernization, we kind of changed the criteria here and focus on different things. So you see a lot less focus on congestion, safety, and freight, and more focus on, well, freight's still pretty high, but lane width, shoulder width, and pavement condition. And we refer to these as our deficiency analysis, where we give the highest scores to projects that have the narrowest lane width or have less paved shoulder, and are in poor pavement condition. So these are kind of the deficiencies, and that's really what we're trying to improve when we modernize the system, is to eliminate a lot of those deficiencies on our network. For the non-highway projects, again, not going to dive too deep into this. If you have questions, we can dive in deeper later, or we can get back with you. But we do have at least 4 criteria for each non-highway mode. I think you'll see a lot of consistency in the names of the criteria. So we're kind of calculating a lot of similar things: benefit cost, cost effectiveness. There's a lot of focus around accessibility, safety, even things like capacity and diversion and rail kind of gets back to the same demand density idea from bike head. So a lot of the names kind of correlate, but each mode has specific criteria for that mode, and we get a lot of help from our modal divisions in scoring these projects. So that's really how we score projects. I'm going to take a few minutes here and show how that relates back to our STIP and how we kind of use those results to develop the STIP. So the 10-year STIP identifies funding and scheduling of projects. It's a capital program, and it's about 50 to 55% of DOT's budget. It's a 10-year program. Currently, the first 6 years is what we call our delivery STIP, and these have committed projects. So these are projects that have gone through prioritization that are now programmed in the first 6 years, and they don't have to go back through prioritization. The department is going to be moving forward with them and delivering them. So they can go ahead and be in that NEPA stage and look at the alternatives analysis and all that type of stuff, knowing they don't have to go back through prioritization. The last 4 years of the STIP is called the developmental STIP, and these are projects that do have to go back through. So you may hear a term called carryover projects, and these are projects that have gone through prioritization, are in the back end of the STIP, and have to go back through prioritization again, hopefully with a little more refined scope, refined cost, and we've started looking at those projects on a little bit deeper level. The STIP is updated approximately every 2 to 3 years. We're federally required to have a new STIP every 4 years, and so that's the reason we do prioritization every 2 to 3 in order to not really get up against that 4-year deadline. The STIP contains projects in addition to prioritization, but a lot of your highway, non-highway modal projects do come from the spot process. There are projects that come through other prioritizations or priority assessments that get added to the STIP, including bridge replacements, HSIP safety projects, interstate maintenance, and CMAQ funding. The STIP is made up of kind of 4 main revenues. The first one is our gas tax. Then we have DMV fees. The highway use tax. This is a tax or a fee on car sales at dealerships. And then, of course, our federal funding that we get from Congress. Off the top of the STIP budget comes a lot of things, including your planning SBR type funds. We set aside money for environmental and air quality, and then we have to handle things like cost increases and inflation and many others. But after all that's kind of off the top of the STIP budget, it gets broken down into those 3 buckets that we talked about before. So this is where the 40, 30, 30 comes in. And then even then, off the top of these buckets comes a little bit more money. So the statewide bucket is one pot of funds, but of course you have interstate maintenance, statewide bridge replacements, and highway safety projects that come off the top of the statewide bucket. The regional impact bucket is actually 7 buckets, and this is that 30% is broken down into 7 buckets based on percent of the state population within that region. And off the top of each region are bridge replacements, highway safety projects as well. So the division needs bucket is broken up 14 different ways, and each division initially gets an equal share, but of course bridge replacement, highway safety, and also DA funding, direct attributables to the MPOs, come off the division needs bucket. So before we do programming based on prioritization results, we have to account for all these things, plus the committed projects that are already in the system but that haven't reached full construction yet. So that money is subtracted out as well. And then we get to program projects. So looking back at P 5.0, which is the last one we completed in 2018-2019 timeframe with the 2020-2029 STIP, we evaluated a little over 2,100 projects at an evaluation cost of $61.5 billion. If you look at that, that was about 1,200 highway projects, nearing 54 billion, and 920 non-highway projects, a little over 7 billion. I'm always struck by this, about the how the number of projects are pretty close, but the cost difference is just dramatic about how expensive our highway projects are. We funded about 23% of what we evaluated. We funded 484 projects at $13.5 billion. 2/3 of those were highway projects nearing 13 billion, and then 151 non-highway, about a little less than $1 billion. So that's pretty successful. We would like to have a higher batting average than 23%, but at the same time, the best projects are definitely rising to the top and getting funded. So this is my last slide, just our contact information. I'd be glad to answer some questions here. I want to show you just half jokingly that we are a very diverse group here in the SPOT office. Representing the Wolfpack, you have myself. I came through, spent first 10 years of my career here at NCDOT in traffic safety. And then at the start of P5, I came to prioritization and was the highway, did the highway scoring. And then at the start of P6, became the prioritization manager. Sarah Lee does our non-highway modes, and she's a proud UNC Charlotte 49er. And Sarah is our expert on everything non-highway. Really done a lot of the structure that we have on our non-highway projects comes from the work that she's done, and she has been with the SPOT office since P 4.0. Austin Chamberlain kind of looks like the Appalachian Mountaineer mascot. If you know Austin, don't tell him I said that. Austin's great. He's kind of our GIS support and our mapping. He also helps organize our data for our SPOT Online entry system. It's been great. And our newest member is Justin Green. He's an Aggie from Greensboro. And so he's took my old slot in the highway mode. P6 is his first round, but he's in a steep learning curve, but doing really well. And if you ever have any questions or have questions about a project or whatever, I would start with Sarah or Justin, but you can always reach out to any of us. We'll be glad to help. So that was a really fast and quick overview of how we do scoring. Typically, this is a 3 to 4 hour training session to get new partners up to speed, but hopefully you understand the structure a little bit and how we develop our criteria. We do run a work group before every cycle, and so we're always looking to make improvements and enhance the process. If you have ideas or data that we're not necessarily looking at yet, feel free to share that information with us as well. We're always looking to improve. So I think we've got a few minutes here, Lauren, to answer a few questions, and I'll be glad to do so.
Yeah, sounds great. Thanks, Jason. The first question I'm going to start with here, is there any kind of consideration or research related to statewide population growth and the ability of the roadway system to handle that growth?
We have not gone down a research path of that yet. I think that sounds like an amazing topic. So the answer, the short answer is no. We do have multiple research projects going on right now, some around our safety benefit factors and also how we look at travel time savings. And then probably our newest one that I hope will get some traction is looking at equity in our process, but we have not looked at, statewide growth in that form.
Gotcha. Thanks. Okay, next up would be any thought into how the STIP might go about providing funding mechanisms for projects that may not be exactly prevalent today, but maybe in the future, such as autonomous vehicles, drones, telecommuting, etc. So I guess it's not immediate needs, but making sure that we're planning for that in the future.
Yeah, a lot of the conversations I have around autonomous vehicles has more to do with kind of our design standards. And when we do have a project in a area where, we might be having more autonomous vehicles or, that type of infrastructure, it's including that type of infrastructure when we're making our improvements to capacity or modernization or whatever. So I don't necessarily know that we've gone down the path of looking at those specific improvements for spot projects. I'm not against it because, I definitely know a lot of that technology is coming, but we haven't really included a lot of that yet. So I would say the backlog of needs has been so strong up to this point that we're still kind of playing catch up with the way our current system operates, but we need to be looking ahead and making considerations for the future as well. We are seeing a lot more of ITS type improvements. Ramp meterings, managed motorways in our urban areas to handle some of that growth. And I think a lot of that technology is kind of starting to bubble up, and we'll start seeing more of those projects in the future.
Good. All right, thanks. And then for now, the last question I have in front of us is, could a project be eligible for regional funding if it alleviates traffic from an NC or US route, even if the project itself is an SR route? So I guess as maybe a parallel routes or something like that to alleviate.
Yeah. So we have some situations where if you're like building a new route and it's going to relieve, or it's meant to, pull traffic off a higher order regional route or something, we would have conversations about that project. But if it's on an existing facility, even though the intent is, something larger, right now we're pretty strict to follow the law and the fact that it's based on the route the project is on. But this is also one of those areas, it's a very gray area, and there's multiple gray areas within the STI law. And so we evaluate a lot of those on a project by project basis. So I would say it depends. But a lot of times if it's an existing facility, we've got to base the eligibility off that facility.
Gotcha. Good deal. All right. Well, those are the questions that were dropped in the chat pod so far. If you guys on the webinar here have any other questions, Jason's provided, folks here you can reach out to with those questions, or you can send them through me, whichever you would like to do. Jason, thank you so much for sharing your time and wisdom with us today. I am going to attempt, anyways, to take back the screen. over to myself, and then I've got just a couple of announcements to wrap up. Let's see. Share my screen. All right. So on the announcements front, if you are interested in getting PDH or CM credits for this webinar, that information will be sent to you guys via the email account that you use to register for this session. Another training opportunity is coming up. It's not through NICSite, but it's through APVP, and it's a bikeway selection guide training. It's going to be a 3-hour session. I believe it's in the morning. We'll offer CM credits for that. Currently, it's not offering PDH credits, but that's going to be February 16th. There'll be an email coming out through the NICSite listservs with sign-up information on that. And then additionally, the call for abstracts is now open for the Southern District Annual Conference, and registration for that should be opening soon, probably in early February. So you can visit the website there, 2021.stite.org, for more information. So I mentioned at the beginning that this presentation is brought to you by TPC, and next times will be brought to you by the TEC, but there are also the actual council meetings for each of those will be happening monthly as well. And our first TPC meeting of 2021 is going to be next Thursday, and that is going to be only sent out to those that are signed up through the TPC listserv. So if you're interested in becoming a part of the TPC, as far as helping to plan events like this and our mid-year and annual meetings, feel free to sign up for that email listserv. You can always reach out to me at tpcchair@nicsite.org, and the nicsite.org website actually has a ton of really great information and links, including having this webinar recording and slides posted soon in the next week or so after this presentation. So let's see. Oh, the other one is the next webinar in the series is going to be Forward to the Future, an engineering topic, and it is going to be next month on the 3rd Thursday. So we're going to be holding these on the 3rd Thursday of every month from 2 to 3. So if you want to mark your calendars just as a placeholder, we will be sending out calendar invites, but not until we have a little more information each month about the presentation. So feel free to save the date and look for registration information, which will next time include the password that you need to join us. Again, I appreciate your patience with getting this started. The first one of the year, we knew there'd be some sort of hiccup, but just appreciate everyone's time and look forward to a great year with NICSite. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out. Thanks, guys.